Hello everybody. Today we shall study the story Ishwaran the storyteller. Ishwaran is a storyteller. He has got an art of telling stories with expressions and voice changing techniques. He was so talented in the art of telling stories that listeners would feel it as real. And therefore all his stories were unique and interesting. Not only a storyteller, he was also a cook. Ishwaran the storyteller tells about the art of telling stories. And here in the story, Ishwaran uses special effects about voice modulation, uses his body language, and many other things to make his stories effective. And especially Mahendran, when he listens to the stories, he is captivated and attracted by the style of storytelling. The story was narrated to Ganesh by a young man, Mahendra by name. He was a junior supervisor in a firm which offered on hire supervisors at various types of construction sites like factories, bridges, dams, and so on. Mahendra's job was to keep an eye on the activities at the work site. So, being a supervisor, he had to go to various places to supervise the work site. He had to keep moving from one place to another every now and then as ordered by his head office. From a coal mining area to a railway bridge construction site, from there after a few months to a chemical plant which was coming up somewhere. So obviously he could not be at one place. Wherever it was required, he had to move on with his work. He was a bachelor. His needs were simple and he was able to adjust himself to all kinds of odd conditions, whether it was an ill-equipped circuit house or a makeshift canvas tent in the middle of a stone quarry. So here we see that being a bachelor and his needs were very simple, he could adjust to all the type of conditions. But one asset he had was his cook. So the main possession or the main thing that he possessed was his precious cook called Ishwaran. The cook was quite attached to Mahendra and followed him uncomplainingly wherever he was posted. So that was a very big important thing, that wherever Mahendra went, along with that, Ishwaran was also going with him. He cooked for Mahendra, washed his clothes, and chatted away with his master at night. Ishwaran could weave out endless stories and anecdotes on varied subjects. So Ishwaran had this capacity to cook up anything, not only food but cook up stories. So he was a master in that. Ishwaran also had an amazing capacity to produce vegetables and cooking ingredients, seeming out of nowhere in the middle of a desolate landscape with no shops visible for milestone. So altogether he was a very handy man. He would miraculously conjure up the most delicious dishes made with fresh vegetables within an hour of arriving at the zinc sheet shelter at the new workplace. Mahendra would be up early in the morning and leave for work after breakfast, carrying out some prepared food with him. So altogether, Ishwaran was an asset for Mahendra. Before going to work, he would carry some eatables with him, but Mahendra altogether had a wonderful ability to cook up anything, anywhere, at any place. Meanwhile, Ishwaran would tidy up the shed, wash the clothes, and have a leisurely bath, pouring several buckets of water over his head, muttering a prayer all the while. Would be a lunch time by then. So Ishwaran was doing all the household chores after Mahendra left. After eating, he would read for a while before dozing off. The book was usually some popular Tamil thriller running to hundreds of pages. Its imaginative descriptions and narrative flourishes would hold Ishwaran in thrall. His own descriptions were greatly influenced by Tamil actors and authors that he read. Now, Ishwaran had this quality of reading books, And the more he read, the more his imaginations ran. His own descriptions were very vivid, full of colors. When he was narrating, even the smallest of incidents he would try to work in suspense and a surprise ending into the account. That is, Ishwaran would make each and every moment and incident of a story so interesting that people were captivated to his words. For example, instead of saying that he had come across an uprooted tree on the highway, he would say, with eyebrows suitably arched and hands held out in a dramatic gesture, the roads was deserted and I was all alone. Suddenly, I spotted something that looked like an enormous bushy beastie lying sprawled across the road. I was half inclined to turn and go back, but as I came closer, I saw that it was a fallen tree and its dry branches spread out. So the more suspense, the more thrill, the more vividity, and the more color he had in his stories, and that is where Mahendra and whoever listened to his stories were captivated. Mahendra would stretch himself back in the canvas chair and listen to Ishwaran's story without any question, without a critical note. Ishwaran started his stories with suspense and thrill. He will start like, the place I come from is famous for timber. Now, timber is a tree, it's a type of tree which is found in southern India. There is richly wooded forest all around. The logs are hauled onto the lorries by elephants. So these timber trees are very heavy, very huge, very big. So it was usually put on the lorries by elephants to carry it out to factories or big cities. They are huge, well-fed beasts. Now, elephants, everybody must have seen a elephant, and we know the size and height of an elephant, but he will exaggerate the whole thing. When they turned wild, even the most experienced Mohawk is not able to control them. Mohawk is a person who controls the animal. After his prologue, Ishwaran would launch into an elaborate anecdote involving an elephant. One day, a tusker escaped from the timber yard. So, a tusker is an elephant. So, he's starting that one day an elephant ran away from a timber yard, from a timber place, from where timber trees are cut and kept, and began to roam about, stamping on bushes and tearing up wild creepers and breaking branches at will. So, this elephant ran amok everywhere, tearing and pulling down everything that came across his way. You know, sir, how an elephant behaves when it goes mad. Ishwaran would get so caught up in the excitement of his story that he would get up from the floor and jump about, stamping his feet in emulsion of the mad elephant. So he would enact the whole thing as if he was present there, or as if the elephant is present there. Will bring the story into life by adding action and more of suspense. The elephant reached the outskirts of our town. So he continued the story by telling where did that elephant reach, breaking the fences down like matchsticks. He wanted to show the power of that elephant, how powerful he was. So therefore he says that he dropped the fences, he pulled out the fences, he broke the fences just like matchsticks. He's comparing, he's metaphorical here. He's trying to tell that matchsticks toppled down. So the fences also were just a small, simple thing for that huge elephant. He would continue. He came into the main road and smashed all the stalls selling fruits, mud pots, and clothes. So everything was destroyed by this mad elephant. People ran hither, thither, everywhere in panic and pain. The elephant now entered a school ground where children were playing, breaking through the brick wall. So even the brick was just a simple thing for that elephant. All the boys ran into the classroom and shut the doors tight. The beast grunted and wandered about, pulling out the football goalpost, tearing down the volleyball net, kicking and fluttering the drum kept for water, and uprooting the shrubs. So he's telling the ferociousness of that elephant, the horrendous situation where the boys had to run away and the elephant was pulling out the goalpost. Now it's so difficult to pull out a goalpost because it is the post is implanted inside the ground and it's kept there. It dries up and it is completely hold on held on with into the ground. So it's so difficult to pull out a goalpost. So that's why he's referring to that the strength of that elephant. So so difficult to pull out, but it was so easy for an elephant to do that. So tearing down the volleyball and everything that is showing up is the ferociousness, the strength of that elephant. Meanwhile, all the teachers had climbed up the terrace of the school building. From there, they helplessly watched the elephant moving about. There was not a soul below on the ground. So nobody was there to help the children, help the school, help the teachers from this elephant. So elephant was creating a mess. He was moving amok everywhere. I was studying in the junior class at that time and watching the whole drama from the rooftop. So this Ishwaran is telling that he was a small boy in that school and he saw what really happened. I don't know what came over me suddenly. So he suddenly got something. He changed himself at that moment after seeing that elephant. Ishwaran continued with his story. I grabbed a cane from the hands of one of the teachers and ran down the stairs and into the open. Here, Ishwaran is telling that though he was a small boy, but he had that courage to face an elephant. So he pulled out a cane stick. This cane stick is used by teachers to scare away or just to create fear among the students. So he's telling that he pulled out this cane and went down to face the elephant. The elephant grunted and menacingly swung a branch of a tree which is held in its trunk. Now look what that elephant is doing and what Ishwaran is having. He's just having a cane. It stamped its feet. No, it was making a lot of noise also, kicking up a lot of mud and dust. So you can well imagine the madness of that elephant. He's making noise, he's moving out, he's pulling out things, whatever comes on his way, and he's kicking off dust. So it's just a flimsy scene that he has created. It looked frightening. And he had created that scene into such a way that people will start believing it. But I moved slowly towards it, sticking a stick in my hand. People were watching the scene, hypnotized from nearby housetop. So he's telling that people who saw this scene were smitten. They were hypnotized. They could not move out. They were under a spell because they could not imagine a boy facing a ferocious elephant like this. The elephant looked at me, red-eyed. No, this elephant was very angry with red eyes, ready to rush towards me, ready to charge towards it. It lifted its trunk and trumpeted loudly, so the elephant was making a lot of noise. At that moment, I moved forward and, mustering all my force, whacked its third toe tail on the quick. The beast looked stunned for a moment, and then it shivered from head to toe and collapsed. So he has made up a story that he did not hit the elephant on its head, or he did not charge the elephant with something very big, but rather he just whacked the toenail. Now just imagine he cooked up a story that he's going to bring the elephant under his control by hitting on the toenail of the elephant, and that was the impulsive, most nervous point of the elephant on which it was hit, and it was calmed out and collapsed. Now it was really very funny, but still people believed to that vividity of that story. At this point, Ishwar would leave the story unfinished and get up mumbling. Now, sometimes just to create suspense, just to continue the suspense, just to make the story more interesting, he would leave the ending just the way it is. He may not end the story, but he will continue in the same motion, leaving it halfway. I will be back after lighting gas and warming up the dinner. Mahendra would have been listening up, rapt attention would be left hanging. Now, a person who is listening to his story will be left in the middle of the story, mid-air, wondering what happened, what followed. When he returned, Ishwan would not pick up the thread of the story right away. So just to create the importance of the situation, just to continue with the story, he will not immediately start off. Mahendra would have to remind him that the conclusion was pending. So people, not only Mahendra, wherever he went to tell stories, he will not continue his story immediately, but he had to be reminded that your story is still left out. What happened next? What was the ending? Just like small children. Well, a veterinary doctor was summoned to revive the animal. Ishwaran would shrug casually. No, it was just a small thing to face an elephant. He'll show up. He will gori up that. It was nothing a big deal. 2 days later, it was led away by its mahout to the jungle. Well, how did you manage to do it, Ishwaran? How did you bring down the beast? No, that was a question to um, Ishwaran. It was something to do with Japanese art. Now he will put up another story, bring up something which was out of the blue. I think sir, karate or jinshu. Now it's kung fu, and he's telling jinshu. He does not understand the word also, but he's creating that story where others don't understand, but he very well know the head or tail of something. I had read about it somewhere. It temporarily paralyzes the nervous system. So what has kung fu or what has a karate to do with toenail? Yeah, he in karate and kung fu, either you have to flung around your feet or hand, but here he has paralyzed the whole elephant, such a big beast, by just hitting on the toenail. So that was the charisma of his story. Not a day passed without Ishwaring recounting some story packed with adventure, horror, and suspense. Whether the story was credible or not. It does not matter exactly if the story that was told by Ishwaran was true or false, but people enjoyed it. Mahendra enjoyed listening to it because of the inimitable way in which it was told. So suppose if this story is told by somebody else, so the way it is imitated, the way it is presented, it is completely different from what Ishwaran does. Ishwaran seemed to be more than make up for the absence of a TV in Mahendra's living quarters. So obviously Mahendra was moving from one place to another. It was so difficult to carry on all the things. But Ishwaran was a replacement for the TV. He went on to narrate how he sometimes saw ghosts at night. I am not easily frightened by all these things, sir. I am a brave fellow, but one horrible ghost of a woman which appears off and on at midnight during the full moon. And then he continued with that story in such a suspense, characterizing and showing the characters of that ghost. It was an ugly creature with a matted hair and a shriveled face like a skeleton holding a foetus in his arms. So he will not come up with a ghost, but he will come up with more accessories with the ghost. So it becomes more frightening, and the visualization and imagination of the listener goes to a high level. Mayanda shivered at this description and interpreted rather sharply. You are crazy, Ishwaran. There are no such things as ghost or space. Now, people with a scientific base, or people, learned people, educated people, they don't want to listen or hear about ghosts and other things. But after listening to Ishwaran, he will compel you, he'll convince you that yes, there are things like that. Mahendra will say, it is all a figment of your imagination. Mahendra don't want to believe the ghost stories, but he is compelled because the way it is narrated. Get your digestive system examined, or maybe your head as well. So nobody wants to believe it, especially Mahendra being a supervisor, you don't want to believe it, but let's see what happens. And maybe your head as well. You're talking nonsense. He left the room and retired for the night, expecting Ishwan to sulk for a couple of days. But Ishwan is not going to be quite so soon. But the next morning he was surprised to find the cook as cheerful and talkative as ever. From the day on, Mahendra, for all his brave talk, went to bed with a certain uneasiness. Every night he peered into the darkness outside through the window next to his bed, trying to make sure that there was no movement of dark shades in the vicinity. Now, here, this is the charisma of Ishwaran. He did not relate the story, he did not tell the story, he did not do anything. He just told about a ghost who's more ghostly than interpreted, who's carrying a fetus. So that thing, that worm of fear comes inside the mind of Mahendra. And at night he looks around in fear if it is real or not. But he could not see a sea of darkness, but only darkness, darkness, and darkness everywhere. He could not find a ghost there. He had always liked to admire the milk white landscapes on full moonlight, but after hearing Ishwaran's story of the female ghost, he avoided looking out of his window altogether when the moon was full. So the imagination, the vividity, the color, the supernatural things brought into the story by Ishwaran was so appealing that Mahendra stopped looking at the moonlight which he adored and he admired for so many days. One night Mahendra was woken up from his sleep by a low moan close to his window. Now that is the last thing that Mahendra wanted, that he should listen to the moaning of somebody outside his window. At first he put it down to a cat prowling after a mice. He thought it's just a cat. He resisted the curiosity to look out lest he should behold a sight which could stop his heart. Now he don't want to look outside the window, but his inquisitiveness, his curiosity was to such a height that he was compelled to look out. But the wailing became louder and less feline. So feline comes into the cat's category. He wanted to believe that it's a cat, but later the sound was not like a feline sound. He could not resist the temptation anymore. Lowering himself to the level of the window sill, he looked out at the white sheet of the moonlight outside. He could not resist that. He just wanted to find out what was outside. There, not too far away, was a dark, cloudy form clutching a bundle. Mahinder broke into a cloud sweat and fell down on the pillow, panting. His heart started racing fast. He could not believe that whatever Ishwaran had told him is true. As he gradually recovered from the ghastly experience, he began to reason with himself. He started to question himself, reasoning out himself that it cannot be possible that he has really seen a ghost, and finally concluded that it must have been some sort of auto suggestion and some trick that his subconscious has played on him. He don't want to believe that there's a ghost because he's educated, he's a supervisor, he well understands that there's nothing like a ghost, but unfortunately that fear is still there in his mind. By the time he had gone out in the morning, had a bath, and come out to have his breakfast, the horror of the previous night had faded from his memories. Obviously, many times we forget the things that we see last night. Ishwaran greeted him at the door with his lunch packet and his bag. Just as Mahendra was stepping out, Ishwaran grinned and said, "Sir, remember the other day when I was telling you about the female ghost with a foetus in his arm? You were so angry with me for imagining that thing. Well, you saw her yourself last night. I came running hearing the sound of mourning that was coming from your room." So he is really making it clear that what Mahendra saw was really a ghost. Maybe it's not a ghost, but Ishwaran will create a suspicion in the mind of Mahendra that he will start believing that the mourning, the sound, the shrilling, whatever it was, that was all out of a ghost. A chill, a chill, and everything that he imagined last time was true. A chill went down Mahendra's spine, so he was terrified. He did not wait for Ishwan to complete his sentence. He hurried away to his office and handed it to his papers, resolving to leave the haunted place the very next day. So just imagine, the story had such a big effect on Mahendra that he wanted to leave the place the very next day. Through the story, Ishwaran the storyteller, we understand that storytelling is an art. It is an art of bringing charisma, interest, suspense, and generate a curiosity among your audience. In the story, we see that Ishwaran, though he was a cook, but narrated his stories with full of interest, suspense, and variations. And that is what a good storyteller is. He generated a curiosity among his audience, and therefore Mahendra, who listened to his stories and was compelled to leave after hearing his story. That is the power and effect of a good storyteller, to convince your audience. Thank you very much.